The purpose of Wealth Talk is to educate, inform, and hopefully entertain you on the subject of building your wealth. Wealth Builders recommends you should always take independent financial, tax, or legal advice before making any decisions around your finances.
Today's episode is brought to you by Wealth Builders Membership, a proven step-by-step process that helps you achieve financial security within 2 to 3 years. To find out more, head to wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership.
Hello and welcome. This is Kevin Whelan, founder and CEO of Wealth Builders. Always thrilled to be talking to other CEOs who've got fantastic wealth lessons to share. And today we've got the very, very successful and very interesting story. I'm sure she'll share it all with you. Louise Hill, founder of and CEO of GoHenry. So welcome, Louise.
Thank you, Kevin. That was quite an introduction.
Well, you have got an interesting story. And of course, I have sought your permission to go for the highs, the lows, the aha moments and the oh no moments, so that you share warts and all, some of the journey that you've been on. But I'm sure it'd be great for you just to give a brief introduction to what GoHenry do and where you are in the world.
As Kevin said, my name's Louise Hill. I am co-founder and now CEO, although for a long time I was COO of GoHenry. GoHenry is a prepaid debit card and financial education app designed for kids aged 6 to 18 with a very, very simple mission to make every kid smart with money. So we launched, I guess we pioneered the category really in financial education when we launched back in 2012. And we provide parents with the tools to help kids learn about money by earning, saving, spending responsibly, giving, and more, all with parental oversight. About a year ago, we teamed up with Acorns to deliver financial wellness to the whole family and to provide our members with an opportunity to manage money through all of life stages. I haven't said what Acorns is. Acorns is a US-based investing app that aims to bring investing and enable and encourage investing with what they call the everyday American. So easy entry, simple to understand investing.
Well, it's been an incredible journey, and thank you for the introduction to what you're doing. And we'll come back to that. So I'd like to just circle back, if we can, to the beginning, because, you know, from a curry house experience to a business reaching 2 million members in 5 countries and multi-million turnover, there's got to be some lessons along the way of that, surely.
Yeah, I mean, I guess a little bit of background about me, perhaps. I started my working career in retail with the House of Fraser on a graduate fast-track program, and kind of veered slightly off the bricks and mortar retail and into e-commerce as home shopping kind of morphed into e-commerce. And I've got over 25 years experience in e-com at the most brilliant time when e-com was emerging and the whole retail industry was transitioning to digital. So for a lot of the big household names in the UK, I was able to be involved with their move to e-com. And I guess from that, I got a huge amount of experience in the online world, which I needed for GoHenry, and of leading really large-scale cross-functional teams and projects, which again, I've needed in order to have the skills to build GoHenry to the size it is today. Learned a huge amount from a previous e-com business, or from an e-com business that I launched back in 1998. So this is not my first foray into launching my own business. It's the second one. In 1998, I launched an e-com business with a business partner, which we sold to a retail group in 2002. So just 4 years later. And really the big takeaway from that for me was we built the business, to use the startup phrase, we bootstrapped. We did it on very, very little money. We did get to a point where we were turning over about £5 million. We were making a profit. We were paying ourselves a proper salary. But then I realized that I'd run the business into a corner. We didn't want to just keep it ticking over at that kind of level. We wanted to grow it, and I'd left no space to grow it. So we didn't have enough cash in the bank to bring somebody in to take my place so that I could step away and fundraise, nor did we have bandwidth for me to step away and fundraise because there were only 4 of us running the business. At the time, I was really, really cross with myself for not having foreseen that, I guess. But it made me realize 2 things. If you want scale, build for it from day one. And number 2, just how important having your eyes open about the amount of time you need to dedicate to fundraising if you're going to be a really fast growth business and you can't keep that growth going from your own revenue.
Well, why don't we go there? Because when you started the business, and it'd be interesting to go back to that story because it's a fun story, isn't it? How you kind of had that catalyst moment, and anybody who's a budding entrepreneur who's thinking about it, there's a catalyst moment where they kind of make a step and say, actually, there's something here. There's a problem I think I can solve, and I can probably do it profitably, but I need to think about that and get my head in gear and then make a decision. How did that come about? Tell us the story of how GoHenry was founded in your mind.
Well, I said to somebody the other day, I blame my children. I blame them for lots of things. But I co-founded GoHenry with 2 other parents, really, after having been faced with my kids with their hands out in front of me, expecting their pocket money on a Saturday morning, and realizing 2 things. One, I was using cards all the time. Yeah. And so I very, very seldom had change. I might have a £20 note and a couple of pence, but I certainly didn't have the £4 coins for one of them and £5 coins for the other, who was a bit older. And secondly, they'd both been lucky enough to have been given iPods. It turned out many of my fellow parents at the time, I'd given them the login to my iTunes account, and my kids were having a ball. They were downloading music, thoroughly enjoying it, obviously without a care in the world, without any concept that was spending money. And I was trying to figure out, what do I do? Printing out the invoices that iTunes used to send you, pinning them on the fridge, handing them over to my kids on a Saturday morning, giving them the residue of their pocket money. And the more I started to joke with that about other parents, all the stories came out of the woodwork. Either it was a child spending money on working their way through gaming levels or buying something, stars, points, hair scrunchies for their little pony or something. Or it was children shopping on eBay without realizing how much money was worth, without contextualizing what they were doing. There's a story I've trotted out a million times, I'm sure. One of my friends, her son managed to spend £600 on what he thought was a model car, and it turned up on a flatbed truck at the end of their drive and got unloaded. It was a full-size wreck of a car, sort of restoration project. I started working with a couple of the dads at the school who were good friends, looking at, could we build something that would solve this problem, that would give parents the tools to allow their children to use money in the ways that we were using money, but also in a way that taught them the consequences of it and protected them, so where the parent could set limits. I've always been a huge believer in learning by doing, so I didn't want purely educational content. I wanted they can use a card the same way I can use a card, but be safe.
That's interesting, because I mentioned the catalyst moment is logged in most people's minds when they remember creating the solution to the problem, but then they've got to come up with a name. And GoHenry was not the original name, right?
Correct. You have done your research. Yes. Well, there's one of the mistakes for you. We launched called Pocket Money, but spelt without any vowels. So PKTMNY. And every conversation we had with journalists, press, even people phoning up, there was a lot of conversations, or people having to explain, do you see what they've done there? It's sort of text speak. not smart when you're a purely digital business and you need people to be able to find you immediately. So, yeah, we set about changing it. I said I'm a firm believer in learning by doing. So we latched on to Go. We knew we wanted to be Go something. And a lady who's still with the business today, has been with us right since the very, very early days, Claire. She was in another part of the office working on something completely different. She was flagging in our database the test customers that we'd used in our beta to test the app so that we could separate them out from true customers for reporting purposes. And she suddenly piped up and said, guess what the name was of the first child ever to use one of our cards? Now you know, obviously, what his name was. It was an 11-year-old boy who lived in Bristol called Henry. And somebody said, GoHenry, and it stuck.
Now, I know you mentioned Acorns a little earlier. We'll come back to that. But originally, if I recall, the focus was very, very rigid. It was 6 to 18.
Yep. In fact, when we launched, it was 8 to 18.
8 to 18. So why the change?
Because customers kept asking for it for younger siblings. They would start with their 8, 9, 10-year-olds and then say, why isn't this available for my 7-year-old, my 6-year-old?
And of course, there's been incredible research to show that children's ideas and money habits are formed earlier than that. So probably it's quite appropriate, I guess.
Yeah, it was. There's a fantastic piece of research, lots of people cite from Cambridge University, that was commissioned by Money and Pensions Service that shows financial habits are formed from the age of 7. And if you think about that and the fact that we don't teach it at school until secondary school, you can see the problem there.
Well, yes, that's if it's taught particularly well, and one could argue it is or it isn't. But that brings us to the petition, I guess, because that's how we started sort of pick up within Wealth Builders, as we're very passionate about the wealth of the whole family. So the up generation, the pioneers, as we call them, the people who are creating the wealth now, the recurring income now, and the younger generation. And we wanted to curate as much good content as possible. And the GoHenry name kept coming up. Obviously, I know there's some competitors have come into the market since then, but it was always there. And then I noticed you sponsored a petition. How did that come about? What was the logic behind that?
It's at the heart of what we do and why we exist. It is financial education for kids. You know, I've felt very strongly forever that financial literacy should be a compulsory subject in schools. And as we approached, we've been talking to government probably for 2 years now about it. Anybody who would listen to us, we've engaged with Treasury, House of Lords, House of Commons, cross-party MPs, all sorts of people. But as we approach 2024, it's actually the 10th anniversary this year of financial education being added to the secondary school curriculum in the UK. Okay. And for me, there are just so many problems with that. It is mandatory on the secondary school curriculum, but I'm not sure if many people realise there are only 20% of schools in the UK that are left that have to follow the curriculum. It is not assessed, and there's not even specific content. So it really is, I hate to use a cliche, but a postcode lottery. It depends which school you happen to go to. You might have really fantastic, engaged, appropriate financial education in your secondary school, but equally you might have absolutely nothing at all. And we know from our research and lots of other research that 6 out of 10 teenagers are leaving school saying they have no recollection of having ever had any financial education. And that really is a frightening statistic. You know, if you think about the complexity of financial services today, and we're launching young people out there without the tools, without the confidence that they need to understand and manage those and learn from and use those financial services, then we're leaving kids behind. We need to address it.
Well, I can see that the original idea was leaving kids behind in terms of being able to have functionality. But now we're seeing, particularly with AI, you see there's lots of things going on with teachers and mobile phones and so on. And increasingly younger people, teenagers and young adults are being targeted by scammers and phishers, and so much evidence that people are looking to social media as the source of that education. It needs to be grasped, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, by the educational system, but are they the right people to teach it?
I think that's a really challenging question. So we've done quite a bit of research that shows a lot of teachers. So I should actually go back a step and say my fundamental belief is that it needs to be taught in primary school. Leaving it till secondary school is way too late. So it needs to be taught in primary school, in every primary school in the UK. And when we've talked to teachers and looking at other research in the market as well, teachers really raise two barriers to that. Not that they don't want to do it, absolutely not the case, but it is time in the curriculum to do it, and that they don't feel they have the skills required to do it, because like it or not, it is quite a specialist subject. And part of our petition, and certainly part of I was lucky enough to be called to give oral evidence at the Education Select Committee inquiry a few weeks ago into financial education in schools. And one of the key points I wanted to put across was that there are other life skills, and I firmly believe money confidence is a life skill. Financial education is a life skill, like swimming, like riding a bike on our public roads, that are mandatory in schools and are funded differently and are delivered differently. So there is, for what used to be called cycling proficiency when I was at school, is now called bikeability. There is a model of bikeability which is funded by the Department for Transport, and any school can approach the Department for Transport and ask for funds to use one of the approved providers of bikeability, who will then come into the school and deliver the lessons. And we believe that would be a really good model to.
And certainly best to do it early.
Yeah.
Because those are confidence skills, aren't they? That
they are.
We do that. Money weaves itself through the very fabric of our lives. And I read a really great book called Living a 100-Year Life. And I'm a granddad now. And as I was reflecting on the birth of my first grandson, that the life expectancy of him will be 100 years.
It's incredible, isn't it?
And that sounds great, doesn't it? The next generation going to live to 100 years. How are they going to fund that life?
Yeah. Without
the knowledge, the skill, and the confidence to be able to manage money and to fund it all the way through. And you think from a macro perspective, my background is an economist, and from a big picture macro, the government would, you'd think, sit up and take notice. There's evidence, is there not, that the more financially educated our younger people are, the more likely they are to earn. So the tax rate would go up, but the pension age keeps getting pushed back and back and back. So our younger people, if they don't organize their skills and their applications in the right way, could be working to 80. They just could be working and be the longest worked children in history, let alone the longest living. So it's an interesting one. And it's a passion I share with you, by the way.
Yeah.
So how do we get this petition out and about more? Because I know there's, give or take, 11,000 signatures as we record this, and we're doing our best. But how can we get everybody who's listening to this podcast to sign that? We can obviously post that in the show notes, and we'd be delighted to do that. But is there a target number you've got?
Well, I would definitely like to get to the 100,000, which means it has to be debated in the House of Commons. But the more ammunition we can get, the more signatures on that petition, the better. I do believe Treasury is engaging, and I was really pleased to see that the Education Select Committee was set up. That's an independent inquiry into the impact of financial education. I have to remain optimistic and hope that will lead to something, but I am equally mindful that there is an election coming up at some point, and who knows what that will mean for initiatives such as this. So, You can go to GoHenry.com and search, and you'll find the link to the petition there. It's called Make Money Count.
So interesting. Let's switch gears if we can. And I'm sort of interested in the transition of both you and the skills, because as you move from House of Fraser to House of Commons, there's a whole different set of skills going on, isn't there? So when you discovered that you had a business in mind and you shifted from money to GoHenry,
yeah,
how did the marketing start? Because you had to get the message out. What was that journey like?
Frankly, trial and error. So I always think it's amazing when I say these words, but we were the first in market. Unbelievably, we believe in the world. And so in that nanosecond of somebody's attention that we had, you've got to put across what we are and why somebody needs us. You mentioned that, today there are a few other players in the same space who offer the basic debit card with parental controls. Now, there's 80% awareness of GoHenry in the UK. So I won't say we're preaching to the choir, but there is much higher recognition of who we are. Back then, it was trial and error. We tried everything. I can't tell you how many hours I spent on cold, wet, muddy football pitches and hockey pitches at places where we thought we would find parents with their children. So, what I learned from that is that when parents are out doing something with their kids, they want to focus on spending the time with their kids, and they're definitely not interested in listening to me banging on about a debit card for kids. So that didn't work, really didn't work at all. We tried local radio, which is great for raising awareness, but does it actually drive traffic to your website and conversion, people signing up for the service? We tried digital advertising, so Facebook, Google. We tried working with schools, talking to schools, and either looking at it as a fundraising method for the Parent-Teacher Association or just as a service in schools that the schools might want to think about. We tried so many things, so many things. I think what we learnt fairly quickly was that the power of word of mouth, so the power of people who had signed up for GoHenry, who were using the service, telling their friends. Because if you think about the parent network, if you're the parent of a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, you are regularly seeing, meeting, interacting with other parents of 6, 7, 8-year-olds, because there are play dates, there are school pickups, there are all sorts of things. So word of mouth was incredibly powerful for us and continues to be today. And digital advertising worked much better than, as I say, standing by the side of a muddy hockey pitch trying to kind of doorstep parents.
The blood years there, isn't there?
Oh, God, yes. Blood, sweat, tears, and money, because all of those things cost time. And when you're in a startup mode, well, at any business, you've not got a lot of time. It's valuable stuff and money.
So let's talk about the money then. So it seems to me there's an interesting challenge you went through. So is it easier to build something from new and be a pioneer, or is it better to fix something and join a market that's already maybe fragmented, but nonetheless well established? What are your views on that?
If you're joining a market that's already established, you have the ability to say, we're like XYZ, but better. When you're new in the market, as I already said, you've got to explain what the heck you're offering and why that's important. So, but I think both have their challenges. I don't think I have a preference. I guess my first business, e-com, that was launching into a market that was building strongly. We did launch with what we thought was a different take. What we were seeing was lots of what I'm going to call Scandinavian loft living style e-com sites. We were a homeware, furniture and homewares site, and we launched traditional country house style offering. So we thought, it was a different take on what was in the market. No, I don't think I would pick a preference. I think it depends on where you see the opportunity.
But that has to feed through, though, to funding, because
Yes.
you convince the initial, either the seed funders or pre-seed.
Yes.
How did the funding go? How did you start that?
Asking everyone I knew if they knew anybody they thought might invest. I mean, it was the first time I'd done this, so I really didn't know very much about angel networks. I'd heard about them, but I was on Google Googling it to try and find them. That's how we raised sufficient to launch in 2012. And we raised almost £700,000. But it literally was, I guess, going around a little bit with a begging bowl, obviously with a pitch deck and a business plan, and I hope a convincing pitch. But it was going door to door, and it took ages. And that was a long slog with some hiccups en route, because we believed we'd raised all the funds probably 8 months before we actually did, with quite a chunky slice of it coming from a family bank. And we got all the way to, I remember coming up to London to sign. We'd got heads of terms. We were ready to sign final paperwork, both with our lawyers either side. And another member of the family flew in from somewhere else and hated it. And it fell apart in a single meeting. And that was a long old trip back on the train to Lymington, where I live on the south coast, thinking, do we have the strength to stand up and go again? All three of us had full-time jobs as well, and families and kids relying on us. And it took another, I'd have to check my notes, but somewhere between 6 and 8 months to find the remaining funds so that we could actually go ahead and start to build the product and launch.
It's fascinating, isn't it, to hear the resilience that's needed to be backing an idea you know will work, and getting knockbacks, the oh no's as I call them, but still having the resilience to continue. So how did it help having three of you to do that?
I think it helped immeasurably. Everybody has bad days. Everybody has a day where, the knockback is harder to take than another day. And having co-founders means you can talk to them, and hopefully they're not having a bad day. So they're like, no, remind you of why you're doing this and spur you on. And, I get involved now in a lot of founders groups, and particularly trying to help early stage startups. The whole conversation about co-founder or sole founder is a really interesting one. I think it must be very, very tough to do it entirely alone. Although, having said that, both of my co-founders left relatively early on in the business.
Why was that?
One left 6-8 months in. Kind of always knew that would happen. His love was the new idea, forming what it was going to look like, not really interested in staying for the long haul and putting the slog in and making it happen. So he left fairly early on. And then the other co-founder left probably 2 years in. And that was largely a financial decision. We'd all been lucky enough to have pretty successful corporate careers. It was a big jump over the cliff to launch the business at a point in our lives. I'm trying to think how old I was, 48, 47, when I had a big mortgage and 2 kids, and so did they. We weren't the stereotypical 24-year-old with only themselves to look after. So he went back to a corporate career and a much bigger pay package at that time.
Well, that's always the sliding doors, isn't it? Opportunity, which one you can go down. So in order to keep you going,
yes,
did you need more funding?
We have taken in several rounds of funding over the years. I believe the up-to-date figure is $123 million so far, which is a colossal figure. And that's made up of several rounds of funding. We had some a couple of top-up angel rounds in the early years. And then in 2016, we did some crowdfunding. We thought we were ready for our first kind of proper VC round. Crowdfunding was becoming a thing. And the team at Crowdcube talked to me about how it worked and I guess the characteristics of a successful crowdfund, and GoHenry ticked almost every box. And so we thought, well, do you know what? We'll give this a go, and we'll in parallel start talking to VCs and because we assumed we'd need the majority of the money from VCs. As it happened, and this is where I blow our trumpet, we were the first company in the world to break what was then the legal crowdfunding limit of 5 million euros.
5 million euros, yeah.
Yeah. It was astounding. It was an incredible moment. And largely, very heavily supported by our own customers, which was fantastic. We were able to issue people with badges on their GoHenry accounts that say investor. There are still a lot of customers today who, if they're contacting our contact center, will say, I'm an investor.
I suppose back to that word of mouth and being proud of sharing the same vision. You've mentioned different language, and I just want to kind of explain things where people perhaps don't pick up the language because now you're so used to it. So when it comes to funding, there are always different levels of funding and different paybacks required from different people. You mentioned the word VC. Do you mind explaining that to our audience, please?
Yes. And I have to say, hands up, I shouldn't use abbreviations. I didn't know anything about any of this. And I've learned the hard way. Do you know one life skill that I think I have? I'm not scared of asking dumb questions. I'm not, I hope I'm not arrogant. I will ask anybody anything. And if it doesn't make sense, I kind of put my hand up and go, can you explain that? VCs, venture capital funds, they are funds set up to fund growing businesses, startups. There's then a phase called scale-ups. I'm not quite sure exactly when you move from a startup to a scale-up, but for companies that are succeeding and progressing, they move into scale-up stage. And you can go to a venture capital fund, never go to just one. You need to go to lots. You need to talk to lots of people. And you pitch your business. You present them with an investor deck, which is effectively your business plan, saying what's the market, why do I think this is going to be a success, who are the people in the business, why are they capable of doing this, what customers have we already got, what are all the figures around that, how much is it costing us to get a new customer, how long are they staying with us, those sort of things. And then they either invest or they don't. And I do think when you read a lot of success stories, it's very easy to say, and we found funding here, and we found funding there, and then we went for this funding. It's a long, hard slog. I had no clue how much of my life or the rest of the exec team's life would be taken up with fundraising. You have to set a good portion of your time to fundraising if you are a business like GoHenry, where really the expenditure on acquiring the customer is up front. We're a subscription model business. That customer stays with us. If they like our services, they stay with us for a long time and they pay their subscription every month. That's great. But to get the customers to grow fast, we have to put the money in up front. And so I guess the term is we're cash hungry if we wanted to grow at high speed, which we did. And so we went for successive funding rounds. And to give you an idea, our A series.
That's the first level after the pre-seed and the seed, right?
Yes, thank you. We had 2 crowdfunding rounds in the middle that brought in 4 million and then 6 million. But when we were ready to do a Series A, and I sometimes call it a late stage Series A because we were late stage because of those 2 crowdfunding rounds, we spoke to over 100 funds.
I wonder how many pitches you've done.
Oh my God. I dread to think, some of them great, some of them catastrophic, some of them to warm audiences, some of them to stony silence. You said the point about being resilient. I was lucky enough to be Gosh, this sounds like I'm name dropping. I was at Downing Street for a entrepreneurs event a couple of weeks ago, and a female founder called Tessa Clark from Olio was on the stage with a couple of other founders and the Prime Minister. And one of the questions asked was, what do you think an entrepreneur needs as a superpower? And she said, resilience. Every day you take a small step forward. You get punched in the face, you go home, you go to bed, you get up the next morning, you take a small step forward, and you just, repeat. And Rishi Sunak actually said, yeah, I can relate to that. But it's not easy.
Well, that's just the point of interviewing you, to share that that's a really powerful lesson. And certainly when we're talking to people about creating their own recurring income, we invite them to take one small step every month.
Yeah.
So it's just a baby step on top of another one, compounding,
yes.
Getting momentum. And it sounds like this is the very epitome of that lesson. So, you mentioned it's a cash hungry business, but I wouldn't mind going back, because you're meeting lots of different people. You didn't know it at the start. You're asking good questions. How did a new startup business created by a woman get into banking in an environment which is not famously revered for their treating of new people entering it, particularly as you've changed the kind of model and structure? Because it's not traditional banking, just making a margin on cards.
Yep.
You said, we're going to charge a subscription. I mean, how did that come about? And what was the attitude of the banking industry? Because you needed a banking partner to pull this off.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I mean, I spoke at the beginning and said one of the lessons I took from my first business was, if you want to scale, build for scale from day one. So we used the term internally, world-class partners. And so we went out and found world-class partners from day one. So we work very closely with Visa. We work with FIS, which is one of the biggest card processors in the world. We work with Adyen for our card acquiring. Again, a name that most people...
all these names at the start, though, would you?
No. You ask for recommendations, same as if you were going to a restaurant, and then check them out. So we built for scale from day one. But I suppose the other most important thing is hiring great people. And that sounds a little bit like a cliche again, but you can't possibly do everything yourself, and you certainly can't possibly know everything yourself. So you need to bring in really, really good people to form the core of the business and trust them, let them do their thing.
Did you ever get in the way?
Now I'm thinking you've listened to previous conversations that I've had. Yes. So I reckon, I don't know how many years in, probably 5-6 years ago, we were growing at an insane pace, really were, hiring people like crazy, new customers coming in like crazy. We'd launched in the US. That business was growing. And I realized that I'd become a roadblock. Well, first of all, I realized I was drowning. That's actually the truth. I realized I was drowning. I was really struggling to keep on top of my inbox, to keep on top of all the meetings I needed to be in. And I tried to sort of step back and think, what's going on? Why is this happening? And I realized I'd become a roadblock. Really, it was not because we hadn't hired great people. We had, but a lot of the rationale for why we did things the way we did was in my head. A lot of the business relationships, who was the right person to talk to at all of those world-class partners that I talked about, was in my head. Everything needed to come through me. And that's a really bad plan. So anybody out there thinking about growing a business, that's a really bad plan. You might want to retain that control so that you know what's going on, but actually you can't possibly, if you're going to grow, to the scale that we've managed to grow. And so I started a campaign that I called Single Points of Failure. And guess who was right at the top of the leaderboard? It was me. But I wasn't the only one in the business. There were others there as well. It was a really, really valuable exercise It made me stop and think, change the way I was doing things. And it's something that we've tried to embed into the company so that it's a continuous process. You can be in many meetings or work groups at GoHenry and you'll hear, but is that a single point of failure?
Right.
It's something we use as a bit of a mantra.
And it's something perhaps you'd recommend any business to think about, because you could do that from straight away, couldn't you?
Yeah. No, it's relevant from day one. So today, together with Acorns, we've got over 6 million subscribers across 5 countries, just to give an idea of scale. We had an exec session last week. We took an afternoon out to talk about succession planning, number 2s, number 3s, rising stars, as we called them. And one of the topics to consider in preparing for it was single points of failure.
Did it affect your work-life balance in any way?
Don't believe anybody that tells you starting a business will not affect your work-life balance. You have to be all in. It's interesting. I've been asked several times over the past years about, network of connections that helps you in your work life. Maybe women are more open to being very honest about this than some of the men I've spoken to. But, my network consists of, and I hope this isn't advertising, Ocado deliveries, a dog walker, people who, when my kids were younger, were friends and tutors and things that would pick my kids up from school.
Right.
You achieve your work-life balance, I think, through juggling your home life in exactly the same way you have to juggle your work life. So, I have some amazing friends who've helped out with all kinds of things, and some amazing dog minders, dog walkers, and Ocado who can deliver almost anything anywhere when needed and save the day. And I have a few things I try and carve out for myself. So Monday night is yoga night. And that became a little bit more challenging when we came together with Acorns, because they're actually based in California. So if you think about the time difference, suddenly that sort of 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the afternoon, evening became very full of group calls, but not on Monday night, because at 6:30 p.m. I go to yoga.
So let's touch on the expansion then. So you've talked about the fundraising and you broke some records, you pioneered the idea of charging a subscription. And over time, the subscription nudges up, I guess. What have you done just in as far as testing that in different countries? Because you started off looking at Europe, and I'm sure everybody will talk about cultural differences, but I think you were working with PixPay, and they already had a footprint, didn't they? So culturally, they sort of already know what was going on there. So how did that come about?
Originally, when we started thinking about geographical expansion, I have to say I assumed we would go to Europe first. But when we did our research, we decided we would go to the US first. So we launched in the US back in 2018. Gosh, it's a long while ago now. And then it was only in probably late 2020 that we started really seriously looking at Europe as well.
Okay.
And we ran a project team originally called Organic and Inorganic, but I could never remember which way round that was. So I called it Buy or Build, because then it kind of does what it says on the tin. Yeah. So really looking at, if we were to build GoHenry, we were going to launch in France first. What would that look like? Who were the partners? What did we have to change? What could remain the same? And the buy side of that project, we were looking at who's already in the market. What do they look like? What's the competition landscape? Are there any potential acquisition targets? And you mentioned the name PixPay. We met the guys at PixPay. Fantastic team. They'd started the business 2 years earlier, had launched in France, had already expanded to Spain, and very, very much the same mission as us, all about education and empowerment of kids and teens with money. And we got on brilliantly with them. So, yeah, we went into acquisition talks and we acquired them. We signed the final paperwork. Make sure I don't get my years muddled up, in June 2022. And since then, we've left the branding the same. It's PixPay in Europe, but we've launched with them in Italy in January at the beginning of last year, so sort of 12 months ago. And they continue to grow quickly in Europe. There's very much green space in Europe for these services. And it's been interesting to see. You mentioned cultural differences. There are certain cultural differences. They actually offer cards from 10 and above rather than from 6 and above, because they feel that there is more conservatism about younger kids having access to money. But we'll see whether that remains the same over the next couple of years as the brand grows and people become more familiar with the service.
Well, I suppose you're used to pioneering, aren't you, as well? So you tried our friends across the pond, and many a tragic company has fallen foul across the Atlantic. Yep. So how did that go?
Again, massive learnings. I think one of the biggest challenges was trying to open a US bank account for a UK company. I think I had to send my mother's inside leg measurement, never mind my own, to get through the due diligence involved in that. But taking any business to a new geography, it was fascinating to learn that the same call to action in an ad in the UK that worked really well for us, if we put it in the US, it might bring us in a completely different demographic of customer. And sort of understanding that and trying to unpick that and adapt, it goes back to you have to try again. You've just got to keep putting new ads out into the market, keep trying new strap lines, see what people respond to, and then look at as the customers come in, look at the behavior of those customers, how they're using your services, and see whether it's bringing in the customers that want to use the service and stay with us.
So at that core level of service, by providing the card, mission-led business across, I guess that, but you're providing the card, you're providing the app and the education. What's the difference between the acquisition cost of the customer, the pricing you charge for the access to the card, and the length of time they stay as a customer, in order to sort of get that business model and see how it works across the globe?
Those are key metrics. So to use the jargon, CAC, so the cost of acquisition per customer, the length of time they stay with us, lifetime value. I can't give you the actual metrics. That would be commercially
confidential.
Commercially sensitive. But
I'm trying to work out whether they were similar.
I see what you mean. Right. You've got to take into account, I know you know this, that the stage of the business. So when we launched in the US, no, they weren't the same as where we were at that point in time, so 2018 in the UK. Because in the UK, we'd established a brand presence, we got a decent sized customer base, and people kind of knew what GoHenry was and could have a look and check with their friends, and they'd probably find one who was using us. So no, when we launched, it was much more expensive.
Right.
And you have to go in with your eyes open to that, because there's a period of building awareness and building trust, and this is a phrase we use in our onboarding of every single person that joins the team, is we look after people's money and we look after people's kids. And you really couldn't pick two things that people are more sensitive and protective about. We have to build trust. We have to show that we're worthy of trust. And so that in a new market, that takes a little bit of time to grow. So yes, the early days, more expensive. The same is true as we launched into Italy in at the beginning of 2023. Sorry, get my years muddled.
Well, I can see that. I'm just trying to imagine the difference in you, compared to the employed person going back to 2012, to all the pitches you've done, all the business conversations you've had, all the lawyers I'm sure you've sat opposite
yes.
and learned all about the lawyer speak and the frustrations you've had and the resilience you've shown. How would you sum up how you are different compared to the person who would have had a job for life, probably, or a job that would have been well paid, pick up your pension at the other end and live a happy life? How's that different to you? Who you are, and is it all worth it? That's the key.
Oh, it's all worth it without a shadow of doubt. Yes, I love what I do. It's something my dad used to say to me sometimes. He said, just stop and think occasionally, how did I get here? And that was before GoHenry. But, to be sat in the Palace of Westminster 3 weeks ago as one of only 4 people, non-educationalists, invited to give evidence to the Education Select Committee, if that wasn't a pinch me moment, I don't know what was. I guess this is going into my character. I've never been very good at being told what to do. I have a very stubborn streak. And if somebody tells me what to do, that's probably the last thing I'm actually going to do, even if I know it's the right thing to do. And I think that's probably part of why I went this path. But, I do talk to lots of people who tell me about their business ideas or things that they thought of a while ago but haven't done. And now there's something in market that's doing the same thing. Fundamentally, at some point, an entrepreneur, whatever that is, you've got to jump off the cliff. You've got to believe that this is a good idea and you can do it and you are prepared to take that risk. And some people are prepared to take that risk and others aren't. It's not a comfortable choice. And it's it's not a comfortable journey. The adrenaline is there and is real, but I think I wouldn't be doing a job that didn't demand that of me, because that's what I thrive on. I thrive on building things, making things better, fixing things. For me, the minute something gets very settled and there's no longer any challenges, that's time for me to go. That's not what drives me. It's not what interests me. So I think that's part of it. You asked me financially, what difference does it mean? If I'd stayed in my corporate life, I suspect my pension would have been an awful lot more than it is today. That was a lesson I learned very late in life about putting money into my pension and stashing that away. I hope I have imparted my lack of wisdom to my kids so that they don't do the same thing. They're 23 and 25 now. And I invested some of my pension into my business, into the business.
Went all in.
Yeah. And honestly, on paper, I've got a large number of shares. If at some point we successfully IPO and Acorns and GoHenry as the group are hoping that there is a relevant IPO point in the future, then fantastic.
So an IPO is a public offering of shares to the marketplace. So just letting our people know that some of these words, again, used to your vocabulary, common parlance, but maybe not on theirs, but really getting the whole thing out to the public, which is sort of the final exit strategy. And if you've had money in from different places, wherever they were, the pre-seeders or the seeders or whoever they've invested in, particularly VCs, who are often the venture capitalists, who are obviously looking generally for a payoff within 5 years. What is that looking like then for you as you pilot the ship still further towards potentially some kind of IPO?
Well, we've got so much more to do yet, not least get financial education into every primary school in the UK. So there's more to do before we get there. But yes, I mean, if that happens, then I would end up very wealthy. It's very easy to get carried away with that. At the moment, it's all on paper. Yeah. And I need to make sure that I'm looking after my own financial position, because it might not happen or it might all go horribly wrong. Who knows? So, as I said, I learnt very late the lesson about putting more money into your pension. So I'm 60. the last few years, I've been trying to put as much into my pension through salary sacrifice as I can. I've also tried to make very sure I've taught my kids as they've come along, as they've been growing up, about saving, about investing. Again, investing hadn't even crossed my mind. It wasn't something my parents didn't cross my horizon as a child, as a teenager, just didn't. And in fact, it's only been relatively recently that I've opened an ISA. And that's really learning from other people here at GoHenry. And I've opened an ISA, a stocks and shares ISA, and started investing. But my goodness, if you look at the numbers, I'm like, why didn't I know this when I was 25? But what I can do is make sure my kids do.
And interesting, we talked about all these role changes you've had. I noticed recently you moved from COO to CEO, which is sort of a different front-facing viewpoint. How did that come about?
So I've always been the public face of GoHenry because I was the founder, but I've been COO, Chief Operating Officer, since day one, really because that's where my skill set is. It's building teams, processes, supply chain partners. As we were talking to Acorns about coming together with them, our existing CEO decided it was time to step back. And he'd been with us for 7 years, which is a really long time, really substantial tenure, really, for any CEO. And he'd taken the company through internationalization. So, he'd led us into America, and then with the acquisition of PixPay into France, Spain, and Italy. And really his love is taking early stage startups and really scaling them. Wow. And I think he felt he'd done his job, and it was time to step back. And I put my hand up. Yes, that's been it's been an amazing transition. I talked to the CEO at Acorns about it, actually, Noah Kerner, who obviously I've been working really, really closely with for the last year and a half. Well, and before that, he said, "How do you feel about it?" And I said, I'm going to have to be careful not to swear here. I said, there's part of me that feels about flipping time. I've been COO for 10 years, 11 years, right. Time enough to step up. And then the other part of me thinks, oh, now I've got to put my money where my mouth is. The decision stops with me. And that's a little bit scary, but it's also really exciting. And I have a really, really strong team around me here at GoHenry, and we're excited by what we've got in front of us.
Well, you're used to being a little bit scared, aren't you?
Yeah.
So it's interesting because when I was looking at the business model and seeing that in reality, when someone reaches the age of 18 or when the card expires, I suspect a little bit longer, service comes to an end. So whatever the length of time you have a relationship, and I know that's sensitive information, but what is the difference now that's going to happen with the connection between you and Acorns?
I think the coming together of the two companies, I said we were, very much aligned missions. It answers a question that people have been asking for both companies for a very long time. I've had to explain to investors for 10 plus years why it's okay that it ends at 18. And what coming together with Acorns means is we can now continue to provide those services for every life stage. For parents with newborns, we have our GoHenry Junior ISA product. For families with young kids and teenagers, we have GoHenry. In the US, we've already put this into place. So the GoHenry app, the GoHenry service is now embedded inside the Acorns premium tier. So if you subscribe to the Acorns premium tier, you get all of their banking and investment tools, all of the rewards and benefits that go alongside that, and GoHenry free for your kids. And we're very excited by what that means we're able to offer customers in the States already, and will be able to offer to customers in the UK and Europe in the coming years.
So we'll logically extend the service beyond the age of 18, which will then really expand that relationship and make the business more successful and profitable, which is great. So when GoHenry says go Louise, and you're not here anymore, what are you going to do? When you get the big payday, let's assume that happens, and well-deserved too.
Yes.
And whatever that sum is, you're not there. What are you going to be doing? How are you going to be? You're not going to switch off. I can sense that. But what will you be doing, and where will you be, do you think?
I cannot imagine switching off. If what you've said happens, I'm very clear. I love being involved with startups. I love trying to help and support any startups that I can. Even better if they're female founders, because there are not enough of us. And so I already do quite a bit of free advisory work for a number of startups. I'm also involved with the University of Oxford University, with their side business school and a startup accelerator there. I would love to do more of that. And if I end up with some money from this, then that might give me the space to do that. My plan B, always have a plan B. My friends in Lymington are hoping this happens. I'd like to open a cheese shop.
Nice. that would be relaxing. Bit of wine as well, surely.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, fantastic. Well, listen, it's been a real pleasure and thrill, and thanks for sharing so much of your personal situation, the story, the growth, where the exits will be coming for you, and the challenges in the future. And I thank you very much for sharing today. Thank you, Louise.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget that we are constantly updating our resources inside the Wealth Builders membership site to help you create, build, and protect your wealth. Head over to wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership right now for free access. That's wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership.